black academic robe felt heavier than it should have. It was supposed to be a symbol of weightlessness, of achievement lifting you up. But the thick polyester draped over my shoulders like a leaden cape. I fiddled with the velvet trim on the hood, the vibrant blue of my doctoral regalia, trying to smooth a non-existent wrinkle. My palms were damp. "Nervous, Dr. Evans?" A voice chirped beside me. It was Chloe, a 22-year-old whirlwind of energy who had just collected her bachelor's degree and was buzzing with the uncomplicated joy of it. She looked at me with wide, admiring eyes. To her, my doctorate in clinical psychology was the pinnacle of cool, adult accomplishment. I forced a smile, hoping it reached my eyes. "Just taking it all in, Chloe. It's a big day." "You're telling me? I can't believe you're so calm. If it were me, I'd be bouncing off the walls." She grinned, adjusting her own simple cap. "Is Mark here? He must be so proud." The mention of his name was a cold trickle down my spine. "He's here," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "Somewhere in the audience." "Awesome." "Okay, break a leg, Dr. Evans. Or, don't. Just be amazing." She bounced away to join her friends, a flock of chattering, excited birds in identical robes. I envied her. I envied the simplicity of her celebration. For her, this day was an endpoint and a beginning, bathed in the pure, unfiltered light of personal success. For me, the light was fractured, passing through the prism of my marriage, and what came out on the other side was a spectrum of dread. The line of graduates began to shuffle forward, a slow, solemn river flowing toward the grand auditorium. The muffled sounds of the processional music grew louder, a pompous, swelling orchestral piece that was supposed to fill us with gravitas. All it filled me with was a nauseating sense of impending collision. I found my assigned seat on the stage, a privileged position for the doctoral candidates. The glare of the stage lights was hot, making the dark robe feel even more suffocating. I scanned the sea of faces in the audience. Thousands of them, a blur of expectant smiles and proud tears. It took me a moment, but I found them. My anchor in my storm, in the third row, slightly off-center, sat my 7-year-old daughter, Lily. She was wearing the pretty blue dress we'd picked out together, her small face serious with the importance of the occasion. She clutched a slightly wilted daisy she'd insisted on bringing for me. Next to her, taking up more space than his frame allowed, was Mark, my husband of 10 years. He wasn't smiling. He was surveying the scene with an expression I knew all too well, a detached, almost clinical assessment, as if he were at a mediocre business conference rather than his wife's graduation. His arms were crossed, his jaw set, my heart contracted. Lily waved tentatively, a small shy movement. I gave her a wide, genuine smile and a discreet thumbs up. Her face lit up, and she whispered something to Mark. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on me, and even from this distance, I felt the chill. The ceremony droned on. Names were called, hands were shaken, and the audience erupted in predictable waves of applause. I tried to focus on the speeches, the university president talking about resilience, the valedictorian speaking of boundless futures, but the words melted into a meaningless hum against the roaring in my own ears. My mind drifted back, as it often did, to the beginning. I met Mark Evans when I was 25, a first-year master's student, bright-eyed and drowning in imposter syndrome. He was 30, already a rising star at his financial firm, a man who exuded a certainty I craved. He was handsome, charming, and most importantly, he seemed to see a potential in me that I couldn't see in myself. He was my rock, my biggest cheerleader, or so I thought. "A psychologist?" he'd said on our third date, leaning across the candlelit table. "That's fascinating. You must have a real talent for reading people, for understanding what makes them tick." At the time, I'd basked in the glow of his interest. Now I understand the subtext. He wasn't admiring a skill. He was identifying a tool, or perhaps a threat. The first cracks appeared subtly after we were married. A comment about how my research was cute. A suggestion that I switch to a less demanding program when I confessed I was struggling with a statistics course. "It's just so much stress for you, Ilara," he'd say, his voice dripping with faux concern. "I make enough money. You don't have to put yourself through this." I'd taken it as love, as protectiveness. It took me years to understand it was control. When I got accepted into the doctoral program, his congratulations were strained. 5 more years? That's a long time, Ellie. And the cost? I have the fellowship, I'd reminded him, my excitement already deflating. It's fully funded. Still, he'd said, his tone final. It's a commitment. The commitment became a war of attrition. The late nights at the library were neglecting the family. My exhaustion was a choice I was making. My passion for my work, my patience, was an obsession. He never outright forbade me from continuing. Mark was too smart for that. He simply chipped away at me, day by day, with criticism, guilt, and a constant, draining narrative that my ambition was a selfish flaw. Lily's birth was both a miracle and a new battlefield. Postpartum depression hit me hard, a black fog I could barely see through. Mark was there, but his support was conditional. See? He'd whisper, holding me while I cried uncontrollably. This is too much for you. The baby, the PhD, you're not Superwoman, Ilara. Why do you insist on breaking yourself? In my most vulnerable state, his words seeped into my bones. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was arrogant to think I could have it all. The thought of quitting whispered to me like a siren song. It would be so easy to just stop. But then I'd look at Lily. I'd see her tiny, perfect fingers curled around mine, and a ferocity I didn't know I possessed would ignite within me. I couldn't let her grow up watching her mother shrink herself to fit a box built by someone else's insecurity. My fight back wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. It was getting out of bed when every cell screamed to stay under the covers. It was writing a paragraph of my dissertation during her nap times. It was learning to build a fortress around my spirit, brick by brick, while living under the same roof as the one who sought to besiege it. The last 5 years had been a masterclass in silent endurance. I became two people: Dr. Ilara Evans, the competent, empathetic psychologist in training, and Ellie, the wife who learned to downplay her successes, to hide her excitement, to make her achievements seem like minor, accidental occurrences, and today, the culmination of it all was the greatest accident of all. I had done it. Against the tide of his disapproval, I had reached the shore. Ilara Marie Evans, Doctor of Clinical Psychology. The sound of my own name jolted me back to the present. The applause was loud, echoing in the vast hall. This was it. I stood, my legs trembling slightly, and walked toward the center of the stage. The university president, a kind-faced woman with silver hair, held out her hand. As I shook it, I looked out at the audience again. I saw Lily, clapping with all her might, her face a beacon of pure joy, and I saw Mark. He was clapping too, but slowly, mechanically. The look on his face was no longer detached. It was something darker, more visceral. It was the raw, unmasked expression of a man who saw his narrative, the narrative he had spent a decade crafting, being publicly dismantled. I accepted my diploma tube, a hollow cylinder that somehow contained the weight of 10 years of struggle. The president gestured for me to move on, but I was frozen for a second, trapped in the crossfire between my daughter's radiant pride and my husband's icy resentment. And then it happened. As I turned to walk back to my seat, Mark stood up. He wasn't tall, but he had a presence that commanded attention. The applause began to die down, as it naturally does when a graduate moves across the stage. In that descending quiet, his voice cut through the air, clear and sharp as broken glass. Ilara. I stopped. The entire auditorium seemed to hold its breath. All eyes swung from me to him. He took a step forward, into the aisle. His face was a mask of contempt. You don't deserve this. A collective, sharp gasp rippled through the crowd. Thousands of people stared, horrified, fascinated. On the stage, my professors and colleagues looked on in stunned silence. I saw Chloe's hand fly to her mouth. I saw the university president's smile vanish, replaced by confusion and alarm. Time slowed, stretching into a terrible, silent vacuum. All the air was sucked out of the room. Every doubt he had ever planted, every cruel word he had ever whispered in the dark, every time I had felt like an imposter. It all coalesced in that moment. A black hole threatening to collapse me into nothing. I looked at him, standing there in the aisle, believing he had finally, publicly put me in my place. I looked at Lily, whose small face was crumpled in confusion and fear. I saw her clutch the daisy tighter, her little knuckles white, and in that suspended second the fortress I had built brick by brick over 10 long years held firm. The two Ilaras, the diminished wife and the emerging doctor, merged into one. The weight of the robe suddenly felt different. It wasn't a burden anymore. It was armor. The silence was absolute, waiting to be filled. I took a slow, deliberate breath, walked back to the podium, and leaned into the microphone. My voice, when it came out, didn't tremble. It was calm, clear, and carried to the very back of the hall. What happened next would change everything, but in that moment, all I could see was the stunned expression on my husband's face as I, for the first time, refused to be silent. The silence after my words wasn't the same as the silence after his. His had been a vacuum, shocked and passive. The one I created was alive, electric, a held breath waiting for the world to restart. I didn't shout. I didn't weep. I spoke into the microphone with a clarity that seemed to ring from the very rafters of the auditorium, a tone I usually reserved for my most fragile patients in their moments of crisis. It was the voice of absolute, unshakable certainty. "You're right, Mark," I said. My gaze locked not on him, but on my daughter. On Lily. Her wide, frightened eyes were my compass. This was for her. This had always been for her. I don't deserve this. I gestured slightly with the diploma tube, indicating the scene, his public humiliation, the stunned crowd, the poison he had chosen to inject into what should have been a day of joy. No one deserves to have their achievement met with contempt, especially not from the person who vowed to support them. A murmur rippled through the audience, a wave of realization. This was not a melodrama. This was a correction, I continued, my voice softening but losing none of its power. But this diploma? I held it up, not as a trophy, but as evidence. This represents 6 years of research, of listening to people in their deepest pain, of learning how to heal minds, including my own. It represents missed bedtimes with my daughter so I could study, and the guilt that came with that. It represents overcoming a darkness that told me I wasn't strong enough, smart enough, or deserving enough. So yes, I do deserve this. I earned it, and I will not let you or anyone shame me for it. I looked directly at him then. The anger on his face had been replaced by something else, a stunned, bewildered fury. He was a man who had pressed a button expecting an explosion, only to find the bomb had been disarmed long ago. He was exposed, and he knew it. Before he could form a response, before the tension could break into chaos or applause, I turned from the microphone. I didn't look back at the audience, at my colleagues, or at Mark. I walked calmly to my seat and sat down, placing the diploma tube neatly on my lap. My hands were steady. The silence held for another beat, and then the university president, a consummate professional, stepped quickly to the podium. "Thank you for those heartfelt words, Dr. Evans," she said, her voice admirably even. "Let's continue our celebration of achievement, shall we? Next we have..." The ceremony stumbled forward, but the atmosphere was irrevocably changed. The pompous music now sounded hollow. The applause for the subsequent graduates felt polite, distracted. All the energy in the room had been funneled into the space between my seat on the stage and the empty aisle where Mark had been standing. I kept my eyes forward, a serene mask firmly in place, but my peripheral vision registered the scene. Mark had sunk back into his seat, his posture rigid. Lily was leaning away from him, her small body angled toward the stage, toward me. The rest of the ceremony was a blur. When it finally ended, a cacophony of relieved chatter and scraping chairs erupted. I was immediately surrounded by a protective cordon of my fellow graduates. Chloe squeezed my arm, her eyes shining with tears. "Dr. Evans, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen," she whispered. My thesis advisor, Dr. Peterson, a man of few words and a gruff exterior, simply placed a hand on my shoulder and gave it a firm, approving shake. "Well done, Ilara," he murmured. "On all counts." The plan had been to meet Mark and Lily by the main entrance for photos. That plan was ash. I texted Lily's phone, a simple, cheap one we used for emergencies. "Meet me by the fountain near the library. Just you. I love you." I moved through the crowd, the black robe now feeling like a shield. People parted for me, offering small, sympathetic smiles or looks of outright admiration. I was no longer just another graduate. I was an event, a spectacle. I kept my head high, focusing on the path to the fountain. She was there, waiting, the wilted daisy still clutched in her hand. Her face was pale, her lower lip trembling. "Mommy?" she said as I approached, her voice small. Why was Daddy so mean? I knelt down, ignoring the dampness seeping through the knees of my dress pants, and pulled her into a tight hug. She smelled of strawberry shampoo and innocence. I breathed her in, my anchor in the sudden, terrifying freedom of what I had done. "Oh, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair, my voice finally cracking with the emotion I had held back on stage. Daddy is just very confused right now. He's having a hard time being happy for other people, but that has nothing to do with you, or with me. It's his problem to fix, okay?" She pulled back, her serious eyes searching mine. "But he said you didn't deserve it. But you worked so hard. I saw you," tears welled in my eyes. "Thank you, my love. Thank you for seeing me." I took the daisy from her and carefully pinned it to my robe. "This is the best graduation present anyone could ever give me." "What happens now?" she asked, the question echoing my own terrifying, unformed thoughts. "I don't know exactly," I said, choosing honesty over false comfort. "But we'll be okay. I promise you. We will be okay." My phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket. Mark. Then my mother. Then my sister. The world was trying to break in. I silenced it. I took Lily's hand. "How about we get out of here? Just you and me. We'll go get the biggest, messiest ice cream sundaes they have, and we'll eat them for lunch." A tiny, tentative smile touched her lips. "With extra sprinkles?" "With all the sprinkles in the world," I vowed. We walked away from the fountain, away from the crowds pouring out of the auditorium. We were a pair in a sea of celebrating families, but we were an island unto ourselves. For the first time in a decade, I was making a decision based solely on what was right for my daughter and me, with no consideration for Mark's approval or disapproval. The fear was there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was accompanied by something else, something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of agency. As we reached the car, my phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "Saw what happened. I'm a friend of Sarah's from the law school. If you need to talk or need any help, call me. No obligation. Ben Carter, family law." I stared at the message. Family law. The words were so final, so terrifying. But as I buckled Lily into her car seat, as she chattered about chocolate versus vanilla ice cream, the terror began to recede, replaced by a grim resolve. The battle on the stage was over. The war for our future was just beginning, and for the first time, I felt like I was holding the map. The ice cream parlor was a universe away from the stifling formality of the auditorium. It was a temple of sticky sweetness and neon lights, filled with the shrieks of other children and the clatter of spoons against metal dishes. Lily, perched on a vinyl stool, focused on her sundae with the intense concentration of a bomb disposal expert. The mountain of vanilla ice cream, hot fudge, and a blizzard of sprinkles was a tangible, solvable problem. A problem far easier than the one waiting for us at home. I watched her, my own coffee ice cream melting into a muddy puddle. Every chime of the doorbell made my heart stutter. Every time a man's voice rose above the din, I had to stop myself from turning, expecting to see Mark's furious face. The high of my onstage defiance had evaporated, leaving behind a jittery, hollow fear. I had lit the fuse. Now I had to wait for the explosion. "Mommy, you're not eating," Lily observed, a smear of chocolate on her chin. "I'm saving room," I lied, forcing a smile. "It's too delicious to rush." She seemed to accept this and returned to her mission. My phone, face down on the table, vibrated again. I didn't need to look to know it was Mark. The calls had been relentless for the first hour, then they'd stopped. The silence was more ominous. He was planning. He was stewing. He was on his way home. "Are we going home now?" Lily asked, as if reading my mind. Her voice was small, the earlier joy fading as reality loomed. I looked at her, at the tiny worry line between her brows that was too old for her face. I thought of the text from the lawyer, Ben Carter. I thought of the cold, controlled rage on Mark's face. The idea of walking back into that house, of subjecting her to the aftermath of the scene I had created, felt like leading a lamb into a lion's den. Not yet. Sweetie, I said, my decision crystallizing in an instant. We're going on a little adventure first. A graduation night adventure. Her eyes widened. A sleepover? Something like that. I paid the bill, my hands trembling only slightly as I handed over the cash. We got back into the car, and instead of turning toward our neighborhood, I drove toward the highway. I had no destination, only a direction. Away. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot of a generic, brightly lit chain motel that promised free Wi-Fi and continental breakfast. It was the kind of place you passed without seeing, a transient stop for salespeople and stranded travelers. Now it was a sanctuary. Are we staying here? Lily asked, her nose pressed against the window. Just for tonight, I said, injecting a false cheer into my voice. It'll be fun. We can order pizza and watch cartoons. I booked a room with 2 double beds using the emergency credit card. Mark didn't know I had. A secret I'd started funding with small cashback withdrawals from the grocery budget over the past 2 years. It was a pathetic amount, but it felt like a fortune of freedom. The room was exactly as depressing as I'd expected. Beige walls, a floral bedspread that smelled faintly of bleach, and the low hum of the air conditioner fighting a losing battle against the stuffy air. But it was clean, and it was ours. For one night, at least, I ordered the pizza. We ate it cross-legged on one of the beds, watching a cartoon about talking animals. Lily giggled at the silly voices, and for a few precious moments the weight lifted. This was normal. This was peace. I committed the sound of her laughter to memory, a balm for what was to come. When she finally fell asleep, exhausted by the emotional whiplash of the day, the silence of the motel room descended. It was heavy and absolute. I turned off the TV and sat in the dark, the glow from my phone illuminating my face. The voicemails. There were 12. I put the phone on speaker and listened, my body tense. The first few were furious. Alara, where the hell are you? Pick up the phone. We need to talk about this. This spectacle you made. His voice was tight, each word clipped. Then they shifted to cold condemnation. Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you realize how you've humiliated me? Humiliated this family? Bringing our private life into a public forum like that. It's pathological, Alara. It proves you're not thinking clearly. Then the manipulative turn. Lily must be so confused. You're scaring her, dragging her around who knows where. This is irresponsible. A real mother would think of her child first. The final messages were a different kind of chilling. They were calm, almost reasonable. Ellie, come home. We can talk about this like adults. This is just a misunderstanding. We'll work it out. You're overtired, stressed from the graduation. Just come home, just come home. The words were a spider's silk, inviting and deadly. I knew that tone. It was the tone he used before he systematically dismantled my perspective, before he twisted the argument until I was the one apologizing for provoking him. If I walked through that door now, the narrative would be reset. My moment of strength would be recast as a temporary hysterical episode, a stress-induced breakdown. He would use my absence, my taking of Lily, as proof of my instability. My finger hovered over the text from Ben Carter. No obligation, he had said. But making that call felt like crossing a Rubicon. It was an admission that this wasn't a fight. It was an ending. I thought of Lily, sleeping peacefully in the strange bed. I thought of the daisy, now wilted and brown, pinned to my academic robe draped over a chair. I thought of the years of quiet diminishment. I pressed call. The phone rang twice. Ben Carter. His voice was calm, professional, but not cold. Mr. Carter, this is Alara Evans. We haven't met. You texted me earlier. Dr. Evans. There was a pause, and I could hear the shuffling of papers. Yes, of course. I'm glad you called. Are you and your daughter somewhere safe? The simple, direct question undid me. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to cry finally spilled over. I choked them back, pressing a hand to my mouth. Yes, I managed to whisper. We're at a motel. Good. That's the first priority. His voice was reassuringly matter-of-fact. Now, I don't need details tonight. You've been through enough, but I need to give you some immediate advice. Do not go back to the house, not yet. Do not engage with him over the phone or text beyond telling him that Lily is safe and you need space. Keep it brief and neutral. Do you understand? Yes, I said, my voice stronger now. Having a plan, however basic, was like being thrown a lifeline. Okay, get some rest if you can. Tomorrow we can talk properly. Meet me at my office at 10. I'll text you the address. This is just a consultation, Ilara. You're in control. When I hung up, the room felt less lonely. I had taken a step. I followed his advice, sending a single text to Mark. Lily is safe with me. We are fine. I need some space. Do not come looking for us. I turned off my phone. The silence was no longer terrifying. It was mine. I lay down on the other bed, staring at the ceiling. I was a 40-year-old woman with a doctorate, hiding in a cheap motel room with my daughter, my entire life packed into the trunk of my car. I should have felt despair, and part of me did, a deep, aching sorrow for the life I had thought I was building. But beneath the sorrow, like a seed buried deep in winter soil, was something else. A spark. It was the feeling of the microphone in my hand, the sound of my own voice, clear and sure, filling the silence. It was the taste of coffee, ice cream, and freedom. It was the weight of my daughter's trust as she slept, knowing, for tonight at least, that her mother was in charge. The war was beginning. But for the first time in a very long time, I was the one who had chosen the battlefield. The motel room was steeped in the gray light of a hesitant dawn. Lily was still asleep, her breathing soft and even, one arm flung over the pillow. I had been awake for hours, watching the digital clock on the nightstand mark the passage of the longest night of my life. The spark of defiance I'd felt hours before had cooled into a hard, anxious knot in my stomach. Today, I was going to a lawyer's office. I was going to make the unthinkable thinkable. I moved quietly, showering in the tiny, mold-streaked stall, trying to wash away the exhaustion. I put on the same clothes from yesterday, a simple navy dress I'd chosen for its understated elegance, now feeling like a costume from a different play. The academic robe lay folded on a chair, a stark black square against the beige upholstery. I couldn't bring myself to look at it. Lily stirred as I was brushing my teeth. "Mommy, where are we?" I came out of the bathroom, forcing a calm smile. "Good morning, sweetie. We're at our adventure hotel, remember? We're going to have breakfast downstairs." The continental breakfast was a sad affair of stale pastries and watery orange juice in a fluorescent-lit alcove off the lobby. But Lily was delighted by the novelty of it, carefully selecting a miniature muffin and a box of apple juice. I sipped bitter coffee from a styrofoam cup, my stomach churning. Every time the lobby doors swished open, my head snapped up, my body braced for Mark's arrival. "Is Daddy coming to get us?" Lily asked, her voice small, echoing my own fear. "Not today, honey," I said, my voice tight. "Mommy has some grown-up things to do this morning. You're going to spend a little time with Chloe. Would you like that?" Chloe, bless her boundless energy, had responded to my early morning text with an immediate OMW. "Anything you need." She arrived 20 minutes later, her car stuffed with an absurdly cheerful assortment of distractions, coloring books, a stuffed unicorn, and a bag of bagels that looked infinitely better than the motel's offerings. "Dr. Evans, oh my God, you're a legend," she whispered, pulling me into a quick, fierce hug as Lily climbed into her car. "Don't worry about a thing. We're going to the park, then for more ice cream if that's okay. Lily and I are besties now." I hugged Lily goodbye, my throat tight. "Be good for Chloe, my love. I'll see you soon. Bye, Mommy." She gave me a kiss, her trust a terrifyingly precious weight. "Are you going to get your diploma framed?" The innocence of the question almost broke me. "That's the plan," I managed to say. As Chloe's car pulled away, the loneliness descended again, heavier than before. I was alone with my decision. I got into my own car and entered the address Ben Carter had texted me into the GPS. The robotic voice began directing me through the morning traffic, each turn feeling like a point of no return. His office was not in a gleaming skyscraper downtown, but in a quiet, brick-faced building in an older, established neighborhood. It felt solid, unpretentious. The waiting room was warm, with bookshelves filled not with legal tomes but with novels and books on local history. It was designed to put people at ease, and it did, slightly. "Dr. Evans? Ben Carter. Please, come in." He was younger than I'd expected, maybe in his late 30s, with kind eyes and a demeanor that was both confident and calm. He didn't offer a handshake, just a slight, professional smile as he gestured me into his office. It was a comfortable room with a large desk, but he led me to a small seating area with 2 armchairs by a window overlooking a garden. The power dynamic was deliberately softened. He wasn't sitting behind a fortress of a desk. He was sitting across from me as a collaborator. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice low and even. "Before we begin, I want you to know that this is a safe space. Nothing you say leaves this room unless you want it to. My only goal today is to listen and to inform you of your options. You are in the driver's seat. Always." I nodded, my hands clenched in my lap. The professional tone, the assurance of confidentiality. It was a language I understood from my own practice. But being on the other side was terrifying. "Now," he said, opening a simple notepad, "why don't you tell me what brought you here? In your own time." And so I began. It started haltingly, with the events of the previous day. But as I spoke, the dam broke. It wasn't just about the graduation. It was about the 10 years that led to it. The slow, insidious erosion of my self-esteem. The cute research. The guilt over late nights. The way he'd weaponized my postpartum depression. The financial control. The isolation from friends. The constant narrative that my ambitions were a burden. I told him about the secret credit card. The feeling of walking on eggshells in my own home. I spoke for a long time. The words tumbling out, messy and raw. I didn't cry. I was too numb for that. I just laid it all out. The evidence of a life lived under siege. Ben Carter listened without interruption, his eyes focused, occasionally making a note. When I finally finished, the room was silent, except for the faint tick of a clock on the mantelpiece. He let the silence sit for a moment, then leaned forward slightly. "Ilara, what you're describing is a classic pattern of coercive control. It's not about isolated incidents of anger. It's about a systematic campaign to dominate and isolate you. The public humiliation at your graduation was likely a final, desperate attempt to reassert that control when he felt it slipping away. Hearing it framed in such clinical, legal terms was both validating and horrifying. It gave a name to the ghost that had haunted my marriage. So what are my options?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Well, that depends on your goal," he said calmly. "We can discuss the possibility of reconciliation. If that's what you want, though I would strongly advise certain conditions, including therapy for him and full financial transparency." I shook my head immediately. "No, that's not what I want." The certainty in my own voice surprised me. The thought of going back, of subjecting Lily to more of that environment, made me feel physically ill. "Okay," he said, nodding as if I'd simply chosen a flavor of tea. "Then we're talking about separation and divorce. The immediate concerns are safety, stability for Lily, and finances." He then laid out a cold, hard roadmap of the process, filing for divorce on the grounds of constructive abandonment and irreconcilable differences, the possibility of a temporary restraining order, given the public nature of his outburst and the threatening tone of his messages, the importance of documenting everything, the reality of custody battles. "Given what you've told me about his need for control," Ben said, his tone becoming more serious, "it is highly likely he will fight for custody, not necessarily because he wants primary responsibility for Lily, but as a means to maintain control over you and to avoid child support. We need to be prepared for that." The word custody battle landed like a physical blow. The idea of a stranger, a judge, deciding how much I could see my own daughter, based on arguments crafted by lawyers, was a fresh new hell I hadn't fully contemplated. "What are my chances?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Good," he said, with a reassuring firmness. "You are the primary caregiver. You have a stable, soon-to-be licensed profession. You have no history of substance abuse or negligence. His public outburst, which dozens of witnesses can attest to, works in our favor as it demonstrates poor judgment and a willingness to cause emotional harm. But," he paused, "it will be stressful. And expensive." The financial reality crashed down on me. My secret credit card had a few $100s on it. My name was on the joint account, but Mark monitored it obsessively. My fellowship stipend had ended. I had no income. As if reading my mind, Ben said, "We can file a motion for temporary spousal and child support immediately." It will force financial disclosure and provide you with funds to live on while this is pending. It's a standard procedure. The meeting lasted an hour. By the end, my head was spinning with legal jargon and a terrifying new vocabulary: petitions, motions, discovery, affidavits. But I also had a plan. A frightening, arduous plan, but a path forward. I signed a retainer agreement, my hand shaking only slightly. I was officially a client. I was officially ending my marriage. Walking out of his office into the bright sunlight felt like stepping onto a new planet. The air smelled different. The world looked the same, but I was fundamentally altered. I was no longer just Alara, the wife. I was Alara, the client. Alara, the plaintiff. Alara, the mother fighting for her child. I got into my car and sat there for a long time, not starting the engine. I had just hired a lawyer to divorce my husband. There was no going back. The life I had known was over. The future was a terrifying blank page, but for the first time, it was my page to write. The next week was a study in surreal dislocation. Chloe, my unlikely guardian angel, became the cornerstone of our survival. She insisted we couldn't stay in the sad motel, as she called it, and offered her spare room, a chaotic, poster-covered space in the apartment she shared with 2 other recent graduates. It was a world of scented candles, leftover takeout, and loud music, a stark contrast to the sterile, controlled environment of my own home. Lily, after initial shyness, thrived in the cheerful chaos, captivated by Chloe's roommates who treated her like a tiny celebrity. But this sanctuary was a fragile bubble. The real world was a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety, punctuated by sharp spikes of terror. Ben Carter had been true to his word, filing the divorce petition and a motion for temporary support. The legal papers were served to Mark at his office. The response was not a phone call. It was a barrage. My phone, which I kept on silent, lit up with texts from numbers I didn't recognize. Friends of his, colleagues, even his mother. The messages varied in tone, but the theme was consistent. How could you? He's devastated. Think of Lily. This is a mistake. You're throwing away 10 years over a silly argument. Then came the email from Mark's lawyer, a woman named Brenda Shaw, whose words were like ice picks. She accused me of abducting Lily, of being emotionally unstable, of engaging in a premeditated character assassination at the graduation. She demanded Lily's immediate return to the marital home and threatened to file for emergency custody if I did not comply. I forwarded everything to Ben. His responses were a calm anchor in the storm. Standard intimidation tactics. Do not respond. We have the upper hand. The judge will see through this. But the most chilling communication came 3 days after the papers were served. It was a package delivered to Chloe's apartment. A large, flat cardboard envelope. My name was typed on the label. There was no return address. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a single item, our family photo album. I sat on the floor of Chloe's living room and opened the cover. There we were, on our wedding day, beaming, impossibly young. Page after page documented a life that looked idyllic. Vacations at the beach, Lily's first birthday, Christmases by the tree. Mark had always been the photographer, the curator of our narrative. In every picture, he was the smiling, devoted husband and father. I was the happy wife, the adoring mother. It was a perfect, beautiful lie bound in leather, and on the last page, tucked into the sleeve, was a note, typed on his expensive stationery. This is what you're destroying. This is real. Your little performance on stage was a fiction. Come home and we can fix this. Or I will fight to preserve this family with everything I have. You will not win. It was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. He wasn't threatening violence. He was weaponizing our past, our love, our daughter's history. He was presenting himself as the guardian of our family, casting me as the destroyer. I felt the doubt creeping in, the insidious voice he had planted in my head years ago. Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm the problem. Look at these pictures. We were happy, weren't we? Don't you dare. I hadn't heard Chloe come in. She stood over me, her hands on her hips, her face fierce. She glanced down at the open album, at the wedding photo. He sent you the highlight reel, Alara, she said, her voice softer now. He didn't send you the pictures from the arguments right after those photos were taken. He didn't send the memory of you crying in the bathroom on Christmas afternoon because he'd criticized the turkey. This is a prop. It's not real life. Her words were a bucket of cold water. She was right. The album was a curated museum of a life that never truly existed. The reality was the feeling of my stomach clenching when I heard his key in the door. The reality was the silent car rides, the careful editing of my own thoughts before I spoke. "He's trying to mess with your head," Chloe said, kneeling down and closing the album with a definitive thud. "And we're not going to let him." The following day, I had to do the thing I had been dreading most. I had to go back to the house. With Ben's guidance, and with a police officer present for a civil standby, I was allowed to retrieve essential personal items for myself and Lily. The house felt like a museum of a life I no longer lived. It was impeccably clean, silent, and cold. Mark was there, per the agreement. He didn't look at me. He stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, staring out the window while the police officer waited politely in the foyer. "I'll just be a few minutes," I said to the officer, my voice echoing in the stillness. I went upstairs to Lily's room first. It was exactly as she'd left it, an explosion of color and toys. My heart ached. I packed 2 suitcases with her favorite clothes, her beloved stuffed elephant, her books. Then I went into our bedroom, the bedroom. The king-sized bed was neatly made. On my nightstand was a book I'd been reading. On his, nothing. It was as if he had already erased me. I took clothes, my toiletries, my laptop. I avoided looking at the bed. In my home office, the small room that had been my sanctuary, I felt a fresh wave of nausea. The shelves were half empty. My diplomas, my undergraduate and master's degrees that had hung on the wall, were gone. Only faint outlines of dust remained where the frames had been. He had followed me in. I could feel his presence in the doorway before I heard his voice, low enough that the officer downstairs wouldn't hear. "Taking the trophies, are we?" he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "A shame you couldn't wait to get the biggest one." I turned to face him. The anger I saw in his eyes was pure and hot, but it was the hurt beneath it that shocked me. For a fleeting second, I saw the man I'd fallen in love with, bewildered and in pain. The image from the photo album flashed in my mind, but then it was gone, replaced by the familiar mask of cold control. "I'm taking what's mine," I said, my voice steady. I picked up a box of my research notes. "You have no idea what you've started, Alara," he whispered. "You think your little lawyer friend can protect you? I built this life. I can unbuild it." "It was my life too, Mark," I said, walking towards the door, forcing him to step aside. "And I'm taking it back." As I walked down the stairs, the suitcases bumping behind me, I felt his gaze burning into my back. The officer helped me load the car. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't look back at Mark standing in the doorway. Driving away, the photo album felt like a lead weight in the passenger seat. But Chloe was right. It was just a prop. The real story wasn't in those glossy pictures. The real story was the one I was living now. Messy, terrifying, and uncertain. But mine. He could keep the highlight reel. I was fighting for the unedited, unwritten future. The courthouse was a temple of anxiety. Its echoing marble halls and the solemn, hurried footsteps of lawyers and plaintiffs felt a world away from the warm, book-lined office of Ben Carter. This was the machine, impersonal and grinding. Lily was with Chloe again, who had promised a day of epic playground adventures and pizza, a shield of normalcy against the adult storm. Ben met me at the entrance, his briefcase in one hand, a calm expression on his face. "Remember," he said as we walked towards the courtroom, "this is just a hearing for temporary orders. It's not the trial. The judge will make quick decisions about support and temporary custody based on affidavits. It's procedural. Stay calm. Let me do the talking." I nodded, my throat too tight for words. I was wearing a simple, conservative navy suit I'd bought yesterday with a cash advance from my secret card. I wanted to look competent, stable, unshakable. Inside, I felt like a child playing dress-up. We entered the courtroom. It was smaller than I'd imagined, more functional than dramatic. And there, on the other side of the aisle, was Mark. He sat next to his lawyer, Brenda Shaw, a sharp-faced woman in a severe black suit. He looked impeccable. His suit was expensive, his posture confident. He looked like a successful, wronged businessman, not a man who had publicly shamed his wife. He didn't glance at me. It was a deliberate act of dismissal, and it was more effective than any glare. Brenda Shaw, however, looked at me. Her gaze was a quick, assessing sweep, and I saw a flicker of something, not concern but calculation. I was a problem to be solved. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with a no-nonsense expression and tired eyes. Judge Henderson. She moved through the docket with brisk efficiency. Then it was our turn. Evans versus Evans, the bailiff announced. We approached the respective tables. Ben began, his voice respectful and clear. He outlined the facts. My status as the primary caregiver, my recent graduation and imminent licensure, the need for temporary support to provide stability for our daughter. He was calm, methodical. He painted a picture of a mother seeking to maintain normalcy for her child. Then Brenda Shaw stood up. Her voice was different, softer, almost sympathetic, but with a razor's edge beneath. Your Honor, she began, my client, Mr. Evans, is heartbroken. He is not opposed to supporting his wife and child. He wants nothing more than for his family to be whole again. However, we have grave concerns about Dr. Evans's current mental and emotional state. My blood ran cold. Ben had warned me this would happen, but hearing it was a physical shock. The incident at the graduation, Shaw continued, was a public, unprovoked outburst. It was not the action of a stable individual. Since then, Dr. Evans has absconded with the child, refusing to communicate, hiding in an unstable environment, a shared apartment with recent college graduates, an environment wholly unsuitable for a 7-year-old. She made it sound like a frat house. She made my act of survival sound like a kidnapping. Mr. Evans is a stable, loving father who provides an established, secure home. We are simply asking that the child be returned to that home, her home, while Dr. Evans seeks the help she clearly needs. We are asking for temporary primary custody to Mr. Evans, with supervised visitation for the mother. Supervised visitation. The words echoed in the silent room. They wanted to paint me as a danger to my own child. I felt the walls closing in. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. I wanted to scream, to stand up and tell the judge about the years of silent control, the psychological warfare. But Ben had warned me. Any outburst would only prove their point. Ben stood for the rebuttal. He was unflappable. Your Honor, Dr. Evans's response at the graduation was not an outburst. It was a measured, justified response to a public humiliation inflicted upon her by Mr. Evans, an act witnessed by hundreds. Removing herself and her daughter from that toxic environment was an act of protection, not instability. Dr. Evans is a soon-to-be licensed clinical psychologist. The suggestion that she is an unfit mother is not only baseless, it's offensive. He presented our evidence, a printed record of Mark's threatening text messages and voicemails. He highlighted the fact that I had secured appropriate, safe childcare with a trusted friend. He emphasized my role as the constant in Lily's life. The judge listened, her face impassive. She looked from Mark, the picture of solidity, to me, trying desperately not to fall apart. The seconds stretched into an eternity. This woman, a stranger, held Lily's future in her hands. Finally, she spoke. The court's primary concern is the best interest of the child, Lily Evans. Her voice was dry, precise. The mother is, by all accounts, the primary caregiver. There is no evidence of neglect or abuse on her part. The father's conduct at the graduation was ill-advised and demonstrates poor judgment. However, the mother's current living situation is temporary and, while not ideal, is not deemed unsafe. She paused, looking down at her notes. Temporary primary physical custody is awarded to the mother, Dr. Alara Evans. The father, Mr. Mark Evans, is granted standard visitation, alternating weekends and 1 evening per week. He is ordered to pay temporary child support and spousal support, the amounts to be set based on the financial affidavits to be submitted. Relief, so potent it was dizzying, washed over me. I had won. I had kept my daughter, but the judge wasn't finished. She fixed her gaze on me. Dr. Evans, the court expects you to secure stable, long-term housing suitable for a child as soon as practicable. Then she turned to Mark. Mr. Evans, you are ordered to cease all indirect communication through third parties. Any further communication will be through your attorneys. Is that clear? Yes, Your Honor, Mark said, his voice tight. He still hadn't looked at me. This matter is adjourned. The gavel cracked. We stood. As we turned to leave, Mark and Brenda Shaw swept past us without a word. But as he reached the door, Mark finally turned. He didn't look at me. He looked at Ben, and he offered a small, cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. It wasn't the smile of a defeated man. It was the smile of a man who had just finished the first move in a very long game. The hearing was over. We had survived the first skirmish, but as I walked out of the courthouse into the blinding sunlight, the relief was already curdling into a new, deeper dread. This wasn't the end. It was just the end of the beginning. The war for our future was now, officially, underway. The judge's words, secure, stable, long-term housing, echoed in my head. A relentless drumbeat beneath the temporary relief of the court's ruling. The bubble of Chloe's apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a ticking clock. Her roommates were kind, but we were a disruption in their young, unencumbered lives. Lily needed a home, not a couch. I needed walls that were mine alone. The spousal and child support, when it started to arrive, was a lifeline, but it was also a leash. It was money Mark was forced to give me, and every dollar felt like it carried the faint scent of his resentment. It was enough for survival, not for comfort. An apartment in our old, affluent neighborhood was out of the question. I found myself scrolling through listings in unfamiliar towns, places where the rent was a fraction of what we were used to, where the schools were rated adequate instead of exemplary. It was a humbling, terrifying process. One afternoon, I drove Lily to a viewing for a small, ground-floor unit in a building that had seen better days. The carpet was beige and worn, the kitchen appliances avocado green from a bygone era. Lily, holding my hand, looked up at me with worried eyes. "It smells funny, Mommy." I knelt down, my heart aching. "It just needs a good airing out, sweetie. And we could put your pink rug right here in the living room." "But where would we put the Christmas tree?" she asked, her voice small. The question shattered me. She wasn't just asking about a tree. She was asking about our future, about whether any semblance of our old life could be transplanted into this shabby reality. I pulled her close. "We'll find the perfect spot. I promise." We didn't take that apartment. The next one was slightly better. A 2-bedroom condo on the second floor with a balcony overlooking a small, neglected courtyard. It was clean, if dated. The landlord, an elderly man with kind eyes, seemed more interested in finding a nice, quiet tenant than in running a credit check. When I told him I was a recently graduated psychologist, he nodded approvingly. A professional. Good. The last tenants were loud. I signed the lease the next day, the pen feeling heavy as an anchor. It was a commitment to a life I hadn't planned, in a place I never imagined calling home. Moving in was a surreal experience. Our belongings from the house, retrieved in a second, equally tense trip with a police escort, looked alien and too large in the small plain rooms. The elegant leather sofa Mark had chosen dominated the living room, a relic from a lost civilization. The first night we slept there, on a mattress on the floor, the silence was different from the motel or Chloe's apartment. It was ours. It was hollow, but it was filled with potential. Lily's first weekend with Mark was a fresh hell. He arrived punctually in a new car, his smile a carefully constructed mask of paternal warmth. "Ready for an adventure, Lilypad?" he asked, using his old nickname for her. Lily clung to my leg, hesitant. The court-ordered transition was a brutal, scripted ritual. I had to hand her over, to smile and pretend everything was fine, to assure her that she would have a wonderful time. As his car pulled away, a piece of my soul felt like it was being ripped out. The empty condo echoed with her absence. I spent the first hour just walking from room to room, fighting a panic so profound I could barely breathe. Was she scared? Was he saying things to turn her against me? The silence was a torment. To keep from spiraling, I threw myself into the one thing I could control, building my practice. My doctoral degree was official, my licensure exams were scheduled. I printed business cards on cheap cardstock. Dr. Alara Evans, clinical psychology. I reached out to community health centers, to therapists' networks, offering to take on sliding scale clients. The work was my anchor. In the sterile confines of a borrowed office, listening to the pain of others, I could forget my own. I could be Dr. Evans, the competent healer. It was the one identity Mark could not touch. One evening, after a long day of seeing my first few patients, I came home to find a package. It was from my sister, Sarah. Inside was a simple, beautiful throw blanket, soft and blue. The card read, "For your new home. To keep you and Lily warm. I'm so proud of you. Always here. Love, Sarah." I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders and sat on the floor in the bare living room, surrounded by unpacked boxes. I cried then, not tears of despair, but of a weary, hard-won gratitude. I was building something. It was small, it was shaky, but it was mine. The foundation was laid, not on sand, but on the bedrock of my own 2 hands. Later that night, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark, the first direct communication since the court order. A picture. It was Lily, eating a massive sundae, a huge smile on her face. The caption, "See? She's happy. She misses her home." The old instinct to doubt, to feel guilt, rose up. But then I looked around. At the box with my new business cards, at Sarah's blanket keeping me warm, at the faint outline where Lily's pink rug would go. This was her home now. It wasn't as big. It wasn't as fancy. But it was a place where her mother didn't have to hide, where achievements were celebrated, not shamed. I didn't reply. I simply saved the picture of my smiling daughter. He could send his messages, his curated images of fun. He could keep the house, the photo albums, the illusion of a perfect life. I had something real. I had the blueprint of a future, and for the first time, I was the architect. Part 8. The Silence. After the storm, the final divorce decree arrived on a Tuesday. It came not with a bang, but with a soft thud as the mail carrier slipped the thick envelope through the slot of my condo door. I stood there, staring at it on the floor as if it were a live thing, something that could bite. The words, "In re the marriage of Alara Marie Evans and Mark Robert Evans," were printed in stark, official typeface. Final judgment of dissolution. I didn't open it immediately. I made a cup of tea, the ritual giving my hand something to do. I sat at the small table in my kitchen, the one Lily and I had painted a cheerful yellow the weekend before. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was an ordinary morning, about to be forever marked. The document was dense with legal language, a cold clinical autopsy of a 10-year relationship. It detailed the division of assets. I'd taken less, much less, in exchange for keeping my sanity and a clean break. It formalized the custody arrangement, the support payments. It stated that the marriage was irretrievably broken. Such a small, tidy phrase for such a cataclysm. There was no feeling of victory. No euphoric rush of freedom. Instead, a profound, quiet emptiness settled over me. It was over. The battle I had poured every ounce of my strength into for months was done. And in the sudden silence, the exhaustion of it all crashed down. I laid my head on the yellow table and wept. Not for Mark, not for the lost marriage, but for the years spent. For the woman I had been who believed love meant diminishment. For the sheer, brutal effort of rebuilding a self from the rubble. The sound of the front door opening jolted me upright. "Mommy, I'm home." Lily's voice, bright and clear, echoed through the rooms. It was my week with her. I quickly wiped my eyes, shoving the decree into a kitchen drawer. She bounded in, dropping her backpack, her cheeks flushed from the walk from school. She was growing, changing, the shadows of the past year slowly fading from her eyes. "Guess what I did in art today?" she chirped, scrambling onto a chair. "What, my love?" I asked, my voice still thick. She launched into an elaborate story about painting a rainbow unicorn. I listened, truly listened, watching the light in her face. This was the victory, not a piece of paper. This, the ability to be fully present in my daughter's joy, in my own kitchen, without the underlying dread of a critic in the next room. Later that week, I had a session with a new client, a young woman struggling to leave a toxic relationship. As I listened to her, hearing the familiar echoes of self-doubt and fear, I saw my old self reflected in her tired eyes. And for the first time, I spoke from a place of hard-won authority, not just textbook theory. "The most important thing you can do," I told her, my voice gentle but firm, "is to stop believing his version of you. Your strength is not an attack on him. It is your survival." The words hung in the quiet room, and I realized I was no longer just saying them to her. I was finally, fully, believing them for myself. Months drifted into a new rhythm. My practice grew, slowly but steadily. Lily joined a soccer team and made friends in our building. We developed our own traditions: Friday night pizza and movies, Sunday morning pancakes shaped like animals. The condo began to feel less like a way station and more like a home. We filled it with our laughter, our inside jokes, our shared life. One afternoon, I was hanging a new picture in the living room. A photograph Lily had taken with a disposable camera of our yellow kitchen table. It was blurry and off-center, but it was us. The doorbell rang. It was a delivery man with a large, flat box. Puzzled, I brought it inside. The return address was from a gallery. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew what it was before I opened it. Inside, carefully wrapped, was my doctoral diploma, the one that had been missing from my office wall. It had been professionally framed in a simple, elegant dark wood. There was no note, just the diploma, the culmination of my journey, returned to me like a ghost. I held it in my hands, the glass cool against my skin. I thought of the weight of the robe on graduation day, the silence in the auditorium, the sound of my own voice claiming what was mine. That day had been the detonation. This now was the landscape after the bomb had fallen. It was scarred, but it was quiet. And from the scorched earth, new things were growing. I didn't hang the diploma in the living room. I didn't need to display it like a trophy to prove my worth. Instead, I hung it in my home office next to my desk, where I could see it while I worked. It was no longer a symbol of a conflict or a man's disapproval. It was a reminder of the cost and the prize. That evening, I read Lily a bedtime story in her room, under the glow-in-the-dark stars we'd stuck to the ceiling. As I kissed her forehead, she whispered, "I like our home, Mommy." "Me too, sweetheart," I whispered back. "Me too." I walked back into the quiet living room and stood by the window, looking out at the lights of the city. The silence was no longer empty. It was peaceful. It was mine. The story of Alara and Mark was over, bound and filed away in a courthouse drawer. But my story, mine and Lily's, was just beginning, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I was eager to turn the page.